WLFE-DB Radio has LGBTQ shows like WLFE-DB Radio has LGBTQ shows like Across the Pond, Rainbow Soul, Everything Yet Nothing, and Inside the Drag Closet. Check out the schedule on WLFE-DB.com. You can even watch them on TV at WLFE-DB.com under LGBTQ Friends, right off our website. Again, it's WLFE-DB.com for your LGBTQ shows and more.
WLFE-DB.com, where talk radio is a whole lot better. Our shows are your shows, and that there makes for a great talk radio.
Welcome to Rain. Welcome to Rainbow Soul, part of the WLFE-DB network, an explorative discussion about spirituality beyond mainstream religions. Hollis Taylor, author, psychic, astrologer, and alchemical mage, brings their non-binary perspective together with fellow drag king and trans man Lacrosse Ortiz, a Jewish Taino with spiritual background of exploration that has led him to an atheist perspective. Join these guys as they explore deep and difficult topics, all related to spirituality, offering a queer perspective and exploration of interesting topics and engaging guests to help explore conversations for the Rainbow Soul.
Hey. I don't hear you.
Oops, I was muted. So you should be able to hear me now.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Rainbow Soul. I'm so glad you're here with us today. And I want to say that I am so excited about this show and excited about being here today. And I want to just first start out with that I'm Hollis Taylor. I'm an author. I'm a non-binary person. I'm also pretty spiritual. I'm a witch. I'm an alchemical mage. I'm a psychic and an astrologer. So I come from a lot of different perspectives, and I would say that I'm also a pretty open-minded individual that likes to explore spirituality, especially from the non-binary perspective. And this is my buddy Lacrosse. Lacrosse, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Lacrosse Ortiz. I am a Native American Jewish atheist. I traveled through a lot of different religions and basically came to the conclusion that atheism that's pretty much where I'm at. But I do believe that you can be atheist and also spiritual. So you can actually practice whatever it is, whatever you take along the way and just adapt it into your life and apply it. So that's pretty much where I kind of remove God out of the equation and just look at everything else. So that's my point of view of where I'd be coming from.
Well, I appreciate your perspective. I think there's some people that don't explore any of it, and I'm glad that you've explored it and know where you are. And I think that's kind of like the most important part. And
Right.
I think that's what this show is all about, is us helping to enable people to explore different perspectives and different ways of doing things.
Right.
So I would say, one of the interesting, actually, I just recently got reacquainted with a friend of mine. Got reacquainted with a friend of mine that also was at this event called Standing Rock. And we were just talking about it this weekend. And the most powerful thing about Standing Rock is that it changed you. It changed everyone that attended. And I think even the people that witnessed it from afar, that were praying and sending their prayers, and that's sending things like that to the community. I think that all of those things were an important part of Standing Rock. And I think that we're still integrating the lessons. Like, when I first arrived there, I knew I was doing a story for Two Spirit Camp, but I ended up doing something completely different. That was my plan, but that's not what happened. First, I had to learn from the indigenous tribes to be aware of my impact and how I was impacting the tribes people and to everybody that was there. And I had to learn some other things too. And energetically, with all the prayers and stuff that were going around and my personal physical status at the minute that I was there, created this really sensitive experience. And I actually ended up crying most of the time I was there. I pretty much cried for most of the weekend I was there. I was there for forgiving, which is what the indigenous tribes call Thanksgiving. And I was there for forgiving and the weekend. And by the time I left, I had pretty much been crying for 3 or 4 days. And I really believe that experience, my own experience, was actually like ancestral healing, not just my healing, and the healing of the two spirits that came through. And that's, Standing Rock was like, changed the whole world. It changed the way we did things. And I know for sure it changed the tribes, because the tribes, for the first time ever, were all together on one piece of land in cooperation with each other for one thing. And that was the land, the earth. And I think even you, even though you weren't there, like, how important it was to your tribe, to everybody. Because definitely Taino tribe was there for sure. They were my neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah, we show up everywhere. Because I think that is the whole thing. The principle of a native perspective is the holiness of the land, of the mother. And fighting for the mother, that we're fighting for the earth mother, and the land is just probably the most precious thing to us. And yeah, it's very powerful. It's very powerful.
I totally agree. And I think that it was the Standing Rock experience literally rocked my world. I learned very quickly that I just had to accept the impact of what was happening. Not only my impact, but other people's impact. And I will state from a first person, from being there, my actual experience was that I witnessed crop dusters spraying some unknown chemical on the entire Standing Rock protest. Especially in the morning, I actually had to pee, and I heard an airplane above, and wasn't sure what was going on. And I got out of the vehicle and I looked up, and it was dawn. It was like, the sun was just starting to come up, and an airplane dipped way down lower, than it should ever be.
Wow.
And I'm familiar with crop dusting. I've lived in the farm country. I know what it looks like. And they weren't crop dusting plants. They were crop dusting us.
Yeah.
And they were spraying something, and the entire camp had a cough. And there was a lot of struggle in that, sort of in that way. Like, people were actually sick. Bad things really did happen. The stuff you've seen maybe on Facebook groups or however you witnessed it, that stuff really happened.
Yeah.
It really happened. Yes, we live here in America where you're supposed to be able to protest. But no, those things really happened. Yeah. And so I think I think just witnessing that and hearing someone say that really happened, is kind of like saying we need to reassess our country. And now here we are, 5 years later, and we are reassessing our country. We are rebuilding, hopefully. And I'm so grateful that the Secretary of Interior is an indigenous person.
Yeah.
So I think that the experience in itself was really powerful. And one of the people that I met was someone called Candi Brings Plenty, and she's a Lakota warrior. And they also started the Two-Spirit Nation, Two-Spirit Camp, which was everybody that was LGBTQ. And, we did our best to, I think Candi did their best to make space for the Rainbow Tribe, and they have their own story. We'll be able to bring Candi on here in just a minute. But hey, Lacrosse, I don't know if you know, like, if there's certain things that your tribe is fighting or having movement for in their politics. Do you know?
One thing is establishing our existence. That's been the biggest ongoing fight, and getting it taken out of the history books, because literally it's still being taught that we are extinct. And that is one of our biggest fights right now at the moment, not just our land or whatever thing that happened, just the fact of our basic existence. Because, bottom line, because we were colonized so strongly within the Caribbean, and that's all the Caribbean was strongly colonized and integrated. They're like, no, there are no natives, there are no Taino, there are no Arawak. And sadly, that's not true. So that's been our biggest fight at the moment, because the truth is if we here in Puerto Rico, even in Puerto Rico, if we get acknowledged, that means something has to be given to us as indigenous people. And I think bottom line, they don't want to give us anything. If they give us recognition and say, okay, you do exist, then you kind of, there's some compensation that has to be done or dealt with there. And I think they just don't want to deal with that. So I think it's just right now, just getting our basic existence, people supporting and realizing, yes, we do exist. We're not, we're not gone. We're not genocide. We're still here. We're just integrated a lot deeper than most of the tribes. And another struggle has been just trying to gain our culture back, because a lot of it has been, all we have are some books and trying to learn traditions that were handed down, but we don't really have a lot to go on. Like, our language is lost. Trying to regain the language, there's just so much work to do within the Taino community.
Wow. And that's the part that moves me, that kind of makes my belly move, when you realize the entire culture that many indigenous tribes have lost their entire culture. And that's one of the things that I heard somebody say at Standing Rock. And I wanted to cry. And I did cry all night long. I was like, how did white people just come and take that from them? And why do white people do that? And I don't really identify in that way, although my skin is very white. So I want to introduce one of my favorite people, most inspiring people that I ever witnessed do amazing work for indigenous tribes, especially up in the Dakota area, like up in North and South Dakota. I've seen all kinds of work, amazing work by Candi Brings Plenty. Let's bring Candi out.
Hi.
Welcome, Candi.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you could make it and take this time out. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, definitely. I'm going to do a traditional protocol introduction in my language. So I'm going to do that first, and then I'll speak in English. So Hemetakiapi, Leampetukile, Iuha Chante, Washte Napechuziapie. Imachiapi, Chante Mekielawi, Imachiapi, Wakia Tuampi Io Yampawi. Mi Washichi Chajekile, Candi Brings Plenty. I would like to greet each and every one of you with a handshake from my heart. My name is Candi Brings Plenty, and I'm coming from this evening right now. Sorry. I'm coming from Ocheti Shakoli territory in the Sacred Black Hills here in Rapid City, South Dakota. I am a enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe, and I identify as a queer, indigenous, non-binary two-spirit. I use the pronouns they, them. She, her is still there, but I'm definitely utilizing they, them.
Welcome.
Fantastic. Great to know where you are on the pronoun journey. Because I was like, wow, I'm not sure which one Candi is preference to, but I'm comfortable using they most of the time. So, Candi, I first want to welcome you to, can you tell us exactly what the two-spirit, because one of the things that I notice in white pagan culture and spiritual cultures, especially where there's a lot of white people, is they like to call themselves a two-spirit. And I'm aware that that's probably not appropriate unless they were raised on a reservation of some sort or are indigenous. So can you tell us about what that term means, where it comes from, and why we use it today?
Yes, definitely. So, to clarify, I know there's other folks and other two-spirit people and two-spirit societies who definitely use modified terminology. So I'm going to try to cover it to the best of how I walk and represent it. So I definitely want to clarify that. So two-spirit is an indigenous LGBTQ plus identifier. So, I just want to hit it right off the bat. A white person wouldn't call themselves Latinx, and that's kind of the way you would think of two-spirit. So it's identifying indigenous people to Turtle Island. Some folks like to say, only Native Americans can use two-spirit, or they like to say only tribal people, And so for me, though, however, I have a worldview of Turtle Island being our northern relatives up in Canada, the territories of the United States, and Mexico, because Turtle Island has no borders. Turtle Island is, a one tribal nation. We are all indigenous to Turtle Island. For those of us who have ancestral, we inherited this ancestral sovereignty, resilience. We inherited all of the intentions of being stewards of this land. And so, folks who are not indigenous and who cannot encapsulate that identity, they are not appropriately utilizing, they're culturally appropriating the term two-spirit. So, I really don't like to say if you're Native American, because, that in itself, I don't even use the term Native American,
Right.
because that is a colonized term, and even using the word American Indian to me is so, it's very oppressive, because even the word America in itself is named after Amerigo Vespucci, a cis white male, and I am not going to carry any of that in my identity whatsoever. So just using the term Native American for me is very colonizing and oppressive, because it's a terminology that someone else identified my ancestors with, and without consent said you are Native American. And that is part of that colonization history. And I definitely can trace back my ancestry. And, I know the story of my last name and of my ancestor. And I am a direct descendant from Crazy Horse's band. My great-great-grandfather was the whipman of Crazy Horse's band. And, his name was Brings Plenty Horses to his tribe. And whenever he was placed on prisoner of war camp number 334, which is Pine Ridge Reservation. You definitely can Google prisoner of war 334, because all of our reservations, all the Indian reservations, are prisoner of war camps. That's why they're called reservations. They were land that was reserved to place Native Americans on, and they were not allowed to leave. And, they were just the same as Roman cattle if they left the reservation that was deemed where Native Americans were placed at that time. So, all of it has this terminology, and it's like folks want to culturally appropriate Two-Spirit, but yet they didn't go through any of that ancestral oppression, and yet they want to claim that, and that's why a lot of times people will say it's only for folks who identify as Native American, or they'll say tribal nations. But I like to say, and I continuously utilize the term indigenous to Turtle Island. But so I mean, so I just wanted to say that component, but the term itself, okay, Two-Spirit is an umbrella term. It encompasses the spectrum of LGBTQAI+, the whole alphabet soup in itself, and every Two-Spirit has their own identity. Every Two-Spirit, claims and walks and, expresses what that looks like to them. And so it definitely is an umbrella term, and it was coined in the early 1990s by a group of now Two-Spirit elders. At that time, they were definitely out and public about their queer identities. And even then they said the term queer was very derogative. And there's, just to give a little bit of context, there's over 580 federally recognized tribes in the United States. So that does not cover Canada, that does not cover Mexico. So our relatives from the north and the south is, there's numerous tribal nations. So in the United States alone, that's 580 different tribes who have 580 different languages, 580 different traditional roles and cultural ceremonies and protocols. And, every tribe has their own language. And so that's exponential amount of terms that sociologists, archaeologists, folks who were trying to document in the early 1990s what and how to identify LGBTQ, indigenous people. And so, they were the one who actually prompted and pushed it and asked for indigenous people to come together and identify themselves. So this group of elders in the early 1990s chose to collaborate and use the term Two-Spirit. And that was something they decided on. So our Two-Spirit elders chose this name and cultural identifier for us. And so as a Two-Spirit person, we're acknowledging that not only, because some people use queer indigenous or indigiqueer, but the term Two-Spirit is honoring the sacred place within our traditional roles, within our tribal nations, within the aspect of our spiritual identities. And so we definitely have a component of saying by claiming Two-Spirit, we are walking with that responsibility, and we are representing that in an honored way.
Now, I'm aware that different tribes have different traditions around queer people. And I am used to using Lakota, but I'm sure your tribe has a better name. Is that true about your tribe? Is that the tribe that you are?
Well, Lakota is a language. It's a dialect. So when you say Lakota, that means you're a tribal nation from the West River, the west side of the Missouri River. If you're Dakota, you're from East River. You're east of the Missouri River. If you're Nakota, you speak with the N dialect, and you're from a northern Sioux tribal nation. So I'm Oglala Lakota Sioux. So Oglala is my tribe. I'm from the Oglala Sioux tribe. My language and dialect is Lakota, so I speak with the Al dialect, and I'm from the Sioux Nation. So the Ocheti Shakoi is 7 different tribal nations who are Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, but we're the Sioux Nation.
Wow. Okay,
definitely.
Great.
See, just
and
that in itself, that in itself is how complex, even just, we have a word for, the L, the G, the B, the T, the Q, everything in that alphabet soup, I like to call it. We have a word for that. So you times that by 580, and there's just so many different terminologies for, a gay cis woman, or, just even the gender and the sexual orientation, or even the expression or cultural role. There's so many different languages in our indigenous way of speaking and communicating that it does become complex. And so Two-Spirit is what umbrellas all of that. It even, acknowledges that in our numerous tribal nations, that there is fluidity in gender and sexuality. And so all of that encompasses the term Two-Spirit.
I want to say that there was a beautiful happening. I appreciate all of your beautiful explanation of things. And one of the things that I noticed was that, first of all, a lot of white people don't know all of these differences. We're not taught it, although I think there is an interest, especially amongst people that are a little bit more open-minded or spiritual, because we're naturally drawn to the indigenous tribes because we're like, hey, they actually honor the earth. Whoa. Like, to us, that's magical. And I think that's kind of what drew so many white people, including lots of white people that came to Standing Rock to support, because we do love the earth and we do honor, we want to learn more. We know that we've not been told the truth. We know we haven't been taught things correctly. And so a lot of us are searching for the truth. And that's sometimes hard to find. It's not easy to find. But you can, if you look hard enough. There's plenty of news stations and stuff like that about indigenous tribes. So I wanted to offer you the moment to tell the story of Standing Rock and the Two-Spirit tribe, and how the Two-Spirit tribe affected the Standing Rock movement.
Okay, definitely. So we're not a tribe.
Sorry.
I use the term Two-Spirit Nation, and I definitely will get to that. And, for me, the whole advocacy component and any of the work that I do, and definitely the intention with the Two-Spirit Nation encampment and the Two-Spirit Nation, all the work moving forward is based on an experience I had moving to Portland, Oregon. I lived here in South Dakota. I lived on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I looked and I searched, and the place where I found any type of identity to myself was going to the bookstore, and I waited every other month for Curve magazine. And for me, I felt like that was the only place and way I found anything where I could, see the type of community that never existed for me growing up, that, was very rare. Even just to see articles about lesbians and seeing, queer advertising, and to just read, and have my own magazine that identified with myself. And that was a big reason why I wanted to move to Portland, because I thought and I felt like, oh my goodness, there's a Two-Spirit society there, and I definitely want to move. There's a big queer community. But when I got there, the Two-Spirit society was it wasn't active. There was only like maybe 2 or 3 members. And, I was like, but it was, supposed to, in my vision, I had thought I was going to come find indigenous people, queer indigenous folks, and a whole community. And I ended up building that community, and I ended up, learning more about Portland's community and just being more involved with the different, the sub communities within the queer communities. And I continued to realize, even when I reached out and I visited other cities, how much space has been taken from indigenous people, even in queer communities. Even in our queer communities, Two-Spirit people have been erased, and this is my statement and my quote that I continue to make. It's that Two-Spirit people have been here since before first contact. Two-Spirit people have been documented ever since first contact. And, Pride did not be, yes, Pride began with a protest, but we were celebrating Pride before colonizers even stepped onto our country, stepped onto Turtle Island. And so once I seen that, I knew we had to take space. And I continued, even when I was trying to write term papers or do presentations, there was a really small archived Google search. And it always showed the same few pictures. It was always Weewa and a few other black and white photos. And, so I had said, this is the most historical gathering of nations, and Two-Spirit people need to be seen and heard. Two-Spirit people need to be recognized. And because my parents are survivors of the boarding school era, I myself am a product of boarding school era and all of that assimilation, attempted genocide, the whole intent to kill the Indian, save the man, that very much trickled down to my generation, and my parents were stolen children. And, I really do feel, immensely how much historical trauma has impacted my family, the indigenous communities everywhere I go. And so I felt, being in Portland, Oregon, I've seen how Two-Spirit people were completely erased, and we had to take space, and it was in 2016 when it was the first time I came and watched the Pride Parade, because the years before that, me and my 2 children were always in the parade, and we would wear our traditional regalia, because on the same weekend as Portland's Pride is the same weekend as Oregon's largest outdoor powwow in Portland. So we were able to be in our regalia all weekend, and we would just go to the Pride Parade and then go back to the powwow. And so that year we decided to watch the parade because we never got to see what it looked like. And there was no representation of Two-Spirit people. And when I inquired about it, I learned that there wasn't enough funds for the Two-Spirit Society to be in the parade. And when they got the funds, the registration was closed because they were at max capacity. And so, I stepped forward and I took the leadership of the Portland Two-Spirit Society, and I pursued the Pride Committee. And I had said, this upcoming Pride theme is diversity begins with you. But last year there was no diversity. I looked even for other communities of color. There was a very few. And I had said, so now you guys have to do the work and create space and open those doors. And I took my time sharing and explaining from my worldview what it looks like to be a Two-Spirit arriving in Portland, Oregon, and being so disappointed that at the Pride Parade, there was no representation of indigenous people when they were marching on indigenous land. Literally, they moved out the Multnomah tribal nation and built Portland right on top of this village that used to be there. And I had told them the exact Pride March route is where that tribal nation used to reside. And so, I had 3 asks, and I had said, because we're marching on indigenous lands, the Two-Spirit Society should never have to pay to celebrate and to honor being proud of who we are, and my second ask was that, a teepee definitely is a beacon for indigenous people. When we see teepee, we know that's home and it's a safe space. And so I had asked if we could put a teepee up in the festival area every year. And my last ask was that we begin and lead the Pride Parade with an indigenous prayer, with an indigenous honoring, and to allow Two-Spirit people to be seen and heard at the front. So ever since then, I've been witnessing, that community change, that social change, that impact. So, for me, it's like it was and continues to be a form of healing that historical trauma, because a part of that boarding school era, a part of that assimilation was this terminology of kill the Indian, save the man. And you'll see a lot of very haunting photos of these children who were stolen, and they're in like full regalia. They came from their traditional homelands, and then they cut their hair, they put on school uniforms, and they're just, when you look into the eyes of those photos, they're their hearts broken and their spirits are broken. And so that was the intent, was to try to save this man but kill the Indian within. And so I've seen that and heard so much stories of how Two-Spirit people were very honored. We definitely held a sacred place. We were very revered, and those words in itself, we were sacred, and it was because of religious abuse and persecution and trying to assimilate these young children and these teenagers. They ripped apart all of their cultural identities, including the aspect of how sacred Two-Spirit people were, because it's not part of the church. It's not part of the Bible. It's not part of those teachings. It's the complete opposite of being sacred. So that was part of the attempt to eradicate Two-Spirit people and eradicate women leaders and women healers. And so that was part of that patriarchy and that misogyny. And so all the work that I do, I continue to try to reclaim space and to mend our sacred circles by reclaiming what that means to be a Two-Spirit and stepping back into our ceremonies. And for me, one of the biggest component of being at Standing Rock was being a movement within the movement. And so it was always an intention for me to make sure that Two-Spirit people were documented, that Two-Spirit people were archived, and they were seen in all the spectrums of what Two-Spirit looks like. And so I knew for myself, if I'm going to go to Standing Rock and I'm going to take space as a Two-Spirit water protector, I needed to create that space for all the Two-Spirit water protectors, for all the LGBTQ allies, for all of the water protectors who identify within that spectrum and under that rainbow. And so that's what I took with me, that experience from being at Portland. And I had went to the Elders Council and I had said, I have 3 asks. And I definitely prepared myself before I went to step forward and ask to take space in a traditional way. I was at, here in South Dakota, I was at my mother's Sundance, one of our most sacred ceremonies, when my niece had contacted me and she said she just got arrested. And this was before there was an Ocheti Shakoi camp, before there was even a Sacred Stone camp, before there was any camps. And they were bringing the equipment to start the drilling, to start creating the drill pad, to just, bring the pipes onto the land. And so my niece and a couple other people, they chain themselves to the cattle, I think it's called like a cattle guard, or the fence. And so that was the very first of the arrests, that began for the first time. And so she went live, and she had put out a call to action, and she had said, Auntie, 2 spirit people need to be here too. And she asked me to go out there, and she had said, because one of the components I have that I know that really impacted my leadership is that I know my traditional protocol when it comes to ceremony, when it comes to kinship rules, when it comes to carrying ceremony, and, just following those protocols. And that goes all the way back to my traditional lineage of the role that my great-great-grandfather held. Being a whip man is someone who is gifted this honor to continue to take care of the people, to take care of the Oyate, so that they're following the rules, so that we can function in a traditional way, so that we hold on to our ceremonies. And even, being out on the battlefield, they're the one to look over the warriors who are on the warpath, that they aren't, being excessive in any of the, when they're hunting or when they were in the midst of a battle. There's just this one whip man who literally has a horsetail, like a whip, and they make sure that people are following traditional law. So for me, I knew I had to show up in a traditional way. I had to respect my elders, and I had to present with Chinshasha, which is one of our most sacred medicines. And that's what we use in our prayer pipes. A lot of people think it's tobacco. A lot of people think it's commercial tobacco. And that's not even, indigenous to our tribal area here in the Northern Plains. That's something that was grown on the East Coast and was definitely brought over from the European countries and continents. So even to this day, that, that is not the cultural protocol. So I went out into the Black Hills. I harvested Chinshasha myself. I prepared it, and I gifted it when I went back to Standing Rock to the elders. I spoke in my Lakota language, and I asked for support for, and I pointed out the fact that each and every one of those elders had a has a takoja, which means grandchild, who is either Two-Spirit, or they have a relative or a friend who's Two-Spirit. And in our culture, every single one of our families, every single one of our Tioshbais has someone who's Two-Spirit. And so, and I had said, we are here because we want to make an impact, and we want to support the next generation. This is the way you support the next generation. This is how we mend our sacred circles. And this is how we make our families stronger. And so they agreed. And so they asked me, what are your 3 asks? And so I had said, my first ask is that we get permission to put up a flag on Flag Row that's a rainbow flag, because that shows that we are represented here and that this is a safe space for us. And they agreed. And my next ask was that we get support from the Elder Council to have a long-term encampment, so that we get seen and we're recognized as Ocheti Shakoi as one of the long-term permanent camps. And so they agreed about that too. And my third ask was that we were able to be greeted and invited into the sacred circle at the sacred fire, and seen and being able to go in through the grand entry. So every time a tribal nation came, they walked down Flag Row singing their traditional songs, wearing their regalia, and representing their tribal nation. And so this is where I did have a little bit of pushback. And there was an elder gentleman who I very much felt, he wasn't supportive. It almost felt like, he was very much giving off some homophobic vibes. And he just was irritated in everything I said. And he did grumble around, and he had a cane, and he hit his cane on the ground, and he said, no, he was upset. And he had said, these grand entries are very sacred, and they're for tribal nations. What nation do you represent? So I said, the Two-Spirit nation. And then the grandma next to him said, oh, huh. And so in our language, you hear people say, oh, that's more of a masculine connotation. And that's something like, the warriors would say, or when we're in prayer, that's how, the grandpas would acknowledge, they say, oh. And a lot of times the feminine opposite of that is oh. And that's something that the grandmas would say. And you just don't mess with the grandmas because we are a matriarch lineage. So when she said oh, he didn't say nothing else. And everyone agreed. And so we did get that march. We did get that grand march. We did get to come in. We were invited into the circle. We did give our offering to the sacred fire. And I was really happy that there was a drone from one of our comms folks from Ocheti Shakoni who did capture that. So, I will share that link because it was really, at the time we were kind of confused because I wasn't sure if it was a Dapple drone or whose drone. But, I'm grateful that it did capture that moment because none of us had our phones with us or cameras. We were trying to be real intentional about knowing how sacred this gift was. And so I taught some of the people a Lakota song to sing. It was a thank you song, and it was really amazing because we were finally, it was healing within itself. And that was my intent, was to be a movement within the movement to reclaim our space as Two-Spirit people. And so by being invited to have this grand entry and by all the tribal nations who were there. So that was something that definitely was historical. And, moving forward, we definitely continue to grow within the Two-Spirit Nation camp. And we took space and we started to have a system, and people, different Two-Spirit leaders came from different areas across Turtle Island. They contributed what their skill sets were. Some people stayed long-term. Some people were only there for what they could, commit to. And some people were able to support us from home, and we called them keyboard warriors. And there are people who were at home and shared for us. Because for myself, I didn't go live very much at all when I was at Standing Rock because I didn't have my phone a lot of times. And my intent wasn't there to, hold my phone and take selfies. I was there to take space and walk with my culture and my tradition and to lead by example on what Two-Spirit looks like to me and how I represent myself as a Two-Spirit, and to create space for other Two-Spirit people to do the same.
Well, I'll tell you what, it was powerful for me to arrive at Standing Rock and be like, wow, well, I guess I belong there. Like, it was easy for me to feel like I belonged there. And that was special, right? And I was a reporter. I was just trying to bring the story to the people, show them what was really happening, because I felt like the story wasn't being told because
Exactly.
the news wasn't being told. And so I also want to say that, because I know you're a mom and I know that your kids and your family are there with you, I want to just take another 10 minutes or so. And I'm hoping now the modern movement, now we have gotten some progress with some of the pipelines, but I know some of the some pipelines are not so progressive. Some, we've made some progress. We've taken steps back and taken steps forward. But there's also some other movements going on with indigenous. And one of the things that I noticed that you've been talking about is that there are women, indigenous women, going missing and being murdered. And I want to give you a platform and a space to talk about that. Do we have any idea what's happening to them?
Okay, so that is some of the work I definitely have been doing this past legislative session. I'm an Indigenous justice organizer and lobbyist for the ACLU South Dakota. And so I do a lot of the Indigenous justice issues along with the LGBTQ and Two-Spirit bills that happen. And this year was the first time we were able to advocate for a missing and murdered Indigenous peoples bill. So a lot of times across the nation, you hear MMIW, and that's missing and murdered Indigenous women. And, you know, there's just so much data. There's just so many open cases, and there's so many cases that have never been reported. And especially with the complication of jurisdiction. So a lot of tribes, there's a humongous gap in communication or, you know, just even political action because of tribal jurisdiction, state jurisdiction, and federal jurisdiction. You know, they're all very much different components. And so a lot of times, you know, and I'm speaking about South Dakota right now, I have witnessed how when it comes to tribal issues, it's silent. It's completely silent, and there is no support from any of the surrounding communities or districts or cities. And my tribe is 80 miles from Rapid City. So I live in the city right now. I just moved from the reservation to Rapid City after moving back from Portland. So, you know, I went from Portland to the Pine Ridge Reservation, and that was a humongous, you know, end of the spectrum opposites. And with my job, I definitely have been doing a lot of policy work and community work so that I am now working with the entire West River component of South Dakota and being that point of contact. And there is just so many open cases, especially on the West River, because I feel like, you know, we did a lot of research, and the Interstate 90, I-90 goes through Rapid City. And we have some truck stops where there's a lot of human trafficking that happens. And a lot of times, and it's like over 70% are Indigenous women. And there's a lot of Indigenous women and Indigenous men and Two-Spirits who are missing or murdered. And there's no answers to those open cases. And a lot of times there's not even any search parties. There isn't, you know, they're just closed cases. And here in Rapid City, we also have Rapid Creek, and that's what the city's named after. There's this small little creek that goes through the middle of our city, and there's always houseless Indigenous people found in the creek. And, you know, there's just no background to what had happened or even answers for the families. And so, you know, that's part of why I advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, because it's inclusive. And I get to, you know, because I pushed really hard for folks to include Two-Spirit people. And even when I worked on doing missing and murdered Indigenous women policies and activism, I would use an X in the women, you know, but even in that, a lot of people were having pushback. So I decided to go with missing and murdered Indigenous people. So to continue to include those missing relatives across the gender spectrum.
Yeah, and I felt just really like, wow, what is going on here? Like, I just didn't even know about it. And I totally appreciate your live broadcasts. I know it's not always you holding the camera. Someone else is holding the camera, and you're doing some amazing work, you know, like asking for your land back and things like that, like especially Mount Rushmore area, because that's absolutely, in case people didn't know about that land. Can you talk a little bit about that land up there where Mount Rushmore is? Where
yes, so that's the Black
guy
Hills. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, you know, across the country, there's statues coming down, you know, and there is this overwhelming acknowledgement of white supremacy, of white privilege. But here in South Dakota, you know, the Black Hills, we never sold it. We never sold the land. Our relatives were intentional about not selling the Black Hills because it's so sacred. And there very much is so many caverns, and there's so many caves, and there's just so much ceremony. And our creation story of the Lakota people, you know, we came from the Black Hills, and we still have our ceremonies and hold annual ceremonies throughout the year, throughout whether it's any of the equinoxes or the solstice, but we follow the Wachakpi Oyate, which is the Star Nation. So, you know, our calendar is the Star Nation. And so we know when to move our camps. We know what ceremonies to celebrate. And so that's how we continue to be, it's not just the land. It's not just Unchimaka. It's not just Mother Earth. We definitely are connected to all of the aspects of life, and that's why people would say Mini Wachoni, because the Mini Wachoni means water is life, and it's our relatives. The Star Nation, the sun, the sky, the earth, the moon, everything is part of our way of life. It is our way of life. It is who we are. And so we don't see ourselves as the center of the universe. We don't see ourselves as, dominators or colonizers of anything, because, this is our walk of life, our relatives. So when it comes to the Black Hills, we definitely knew, our ancestors knew we don't sell our land, especially when it comes to ceremony. So it was literally stolen from us. It was just taken from us. Since our ancestors didn't sell it, they continued to mine for gold. And so it was definitely the gold rush that came. And there was gold. There is gold in the Black Hills, but it's just another mineral, another relative of ours. And to have had people buy land that was never sold and decided to take a very sacred space and make a monument to these slave owners and, misogynists and just horrible representation of what it looks like to have something so sacred taken from us, and it's just a symbol of white supremacy. And so Mount Rushmore in itself is like the most biggest, most hugest, most symbolic monument of what that is. And, and even just to be on literal, this is absolute stolen land. I just can't even convey that. So to know that number 45 was coming to our sacred Black Hills was such an offending, just electric shock to my heart. And so many people felt that sting. So many people, we just knew without even speaking to each other, this is where we have to be, and we have to show up, and we have to take space. And, we need for the rest of the country to wake up and acknowledge what 4th of July is and what it means. And that, they're celebrating colonization. They're, continuing to celebrate that this land that they're walking on was, built on stolen land by stolen people. And so all of that was just something I felt had to happen and needs to continue to happen until Mount Rushmore comes down, or until they return it to the hands of, my tribal nations who have always continued to take care of the Black Hills.
Yes, I stand in full support of that. And for some part of me, my whole soul has questioned the colonization my whole life. Even when I was in school, I was kind of like, wait, what did we do? I don't know about that. And, it made me concerned. And that's probably one of the reasons I'm called to the movement now. And I want to just tell you that there's a whole bunch of people in the chat that are saying things like, okay, now some of these people I know for sure are part of what would be considered the white pagan community, but most of us are on the right side. We want to, they love you. So I just want to say that there are people out there that are thinking that they love this interview. They love that you're here. So I just wanted to share that with you, that there's these comments in here and people are just impressed with your knowledge. And I'm so glad that you're bringing this to the light. You're bringing it to the light. You're making people aware, because that in itself is priceless, in my opinion. Because the more people you get on your side to understand what's happening to the indigenous, all the indigenous tribes, the better off we'll all be. And yes. I think that we can help, maybe we can even begin to heal the historical trauma. And so that's one thing I want you to just before we take a break, if there's anything that you can think of that people like me and other white people that are like, man, what did we do? We're screwed up. We got to find a way to fix this or make this better. How can they support indigenous tribes? How can they support your movements and things like that? How can they help? How can they change things?
Okay, well, there's two things I want to talk about. So I definitely want to go back to missing and murdered indigenous relatives, and then I'm going to talk about that next. So the component of why I did so much work recently and I really dove into that movement is because, it's about the extraction of resources from Mother Earth, from Inchimaka. And anytime Mother Earth is being violated, no matter where you're at on the earth, where you're at in the United States, anywhere that you're at where resources are being extracted, women are also being impacted. The matriarchs of those communities are also impacted because there's also this mentality that's connected with extracting resources, especially within the oil component. And so when it comes to these pipelines, there are man camps. So in every pipeline, anywhere there's pipelines that are happening, there are these man camps where, they're housing a large number of these oil workers who definitely are devastating that community, that area, that land base, and not just the land, but what the resources are for the community, whether it's just like an invasive species. It's just like how blackberry bushes took over my backyard, and I loved it. But at the same time, I was just like, okay, now I understand why some people don't respect these blackberries. It's the same thing. Whether it's communities that are, a lot of times they're small communities, they're rural communities. And so a large mass amount of oil workers come into their communities and they want to drink, they want their alcohol, they want their drugs, and they want women. And all of that comes at a price when lives are taken. And that's where women go missing and murdered. And a lot of times it's indigenous women, because these pipelines have been continuously built near tribal reservations. Yeah. And a lot of times it's the indigenous women who pay the price for these pipelines. And so that's why within any of these water protector, land defender, protectors of the sacred, it's the women who are always taking this impact. And, and I don't want to just say women, because there's two spirits, and a lot of time, even within these, at the bars, at any type of gatherings, there's confrontations, and it's just this whole negative, really horrendous impact that pipelines bring when they have these man camps. And, that's why it really impacted me with the Keystone Pipeline. And so that's the pipeline work and fight that I have been on since I moved back to South Dakota these past 2 years. The Keystone Pipeline is like an hour and a half away from where I live right now, but it's right along the river where my niece lives and my sister lives. They're on the Eagle Butte Reservation, and that man camp is built like 10 minutes away from where my niece lives. And she works for one of the tribal high schools. And so, she's a single parent mom herself. And for me, I just can't even imagine how many vulnerable young women are going to be impacted and have been impacted. And so that's why we pushed so hard for the Biden administration to shut down the Keystone Pipeline, because that pipeline has been in the making for 10 years. This was the pipeline before the Dakota Access Pipeline. This was the original pipeline that, woke up this community of water protectors who then passed it down to the youth and pushed folks like myself to step forward. And so it was 10 years in the making when the Biden administration shut it down. But our Governor Noem, is continuously fighting against it, and even has had 19 other governors sign on to sue the Biden administration to keep the Keystone Pipeline. So even though, folks say KXL is dead, a lot of us here continue to call it a zombie pipeline because it's not gone, and that man camp is still built, and that pump station is still pumping, and it's fully built in the ground. And so for us, you know, just like the Dakota Access Pipeline, it's not done, it's not over until those pipes are out of the ground, till those man camps are disassembled. So, you know, that's why this work is so, you know, passionate to me.
Yeah, and I can see that. And I am constantly, like, my heart is just going out to you all the time. Like, I'm like, wow, Candi is doing it again. And I can't believe these man camps. What are they? And I can imagine what they look like. You know, I have lived in a van for 5 years, and I've been up against these places. I've definitely spent some time in the Dakotas, and they're even down here in Colorado, and they're anywhere there's oil, really. And I can, I feel the vibration of them. I'm like, yeah, let's just stay away from them. And it's unfortunate. I can imagine that that's where it's coming from. And, you know, I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the show, is because this right here, this is my friend, that they are actually, Terry is actually finding this as a very enlightening conversation, because I don't think people know what's going on. They don't know. And unless they're on your friend list, Candi, they're not going to see these things. They're not going to be aware of it. Or if they don't read indigenous news, I have to go out of my way to get indigenous news. I have to. That's the only way I can know. So I'm just saying that not all of the news is being brought to you. You know, people, not all of the, so to you people out there watching and witnessing this show later on, being in the replay, be aware that you are not receiving all of the information. You are not getting it. And so if you check in, you might find that there's some more information, especially if you check in with Candi's page or the ACLU in the Dakotas. I check in. This is Ted, the organizer of WLFE-DB, which is our network. So I want to say, Candi, do you have anything else you want to bring? Anything else you want to tell the community before we take a break? And you go back with your family.
Well, I definitely can keep talking. I just told my family's still cooking, so we're good. But
oh, okay.
Yes. And so, I go back to share the story about Jane Fonda when she came to the Two-Spirit Nation camp. And, she was getting ready to leave. She had spent 10 days at Ochati Shakoi. And it was like the day before she was going to leave. And it was actually on Thanksgiving Day. And we were doing a ceremony. We were doing a painting ceremony because the youth council it was composed of over half of their youth council was Two-Spirit. And, they definitely looked up to our camp, and they honored me and asked me if I would lead the action that day at the Turtle Island there. And, I was really, really honored that they came to me and gifted me, that honored space. So we were using traditional Wasay paint, and in our culture, that was war paint. And so at the moment, we were singing and we had this prayer ceremony, and in walks Jane Fonda right in the middle. And she literally said, "Hi, I'm Jane Fonda and I am here. I've arrived," and everyone was just like so grossly offended. No one said anything. And she just knew it. She was like, "Okay, what did I do? What did I step in?" And she was like, am I offending anyone? And so everyone was quiet and they looked at me and I said, "You must not have gone to the orientation." And she was like, "Orientation?" But there literally was an orientation. And that orientation even came from our camp, because we we had white allies who would orient other white allies on how to be at the Two-Spirit Nation camp. And then people really liked that. And they wanted that to be a part of the main camp. And I was a co-facilitator for the daily camp leader circle. And so we ended up creating that into, every new camper who was there, at least, within their first 3 days, had to go through the orientation. And there was even, a more evolved second orientation for folks who wanted to learn more. But, we wanted to teach folks, what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate. And one of the biggest things was, if you see folks gathered together, especially if they're in a circle, observe and, just watch, because you don't know what you're stepping into. And we're there in this sacred space. And so, it was just required to understand that folks were there as visitors, and people were there doing the work. And so I had told her, just this once, I'm going to expend my emotional labor as long as I get to educate you and you carry that forward and continue educating other folks, and she's like, I'm ready, teach me. And so I had told her, because first she had said she was there and she wanted to invite us, the Two-Spirit Nation camp, to her Thanksgiving dinner. And she had said, I brought all, and she named them off. She brought all these chefs and she brought all of these turkeys, and she reserved a bus specifically for the Two-Spirit Nation camp because she was a strong LGBTQ ally. And she said, I want you to know I reserved a bus for you so you guys can take a bus to the Standing Rock High School and we'll have a table for you, and everyone was just shocked. And that's when I had told her that I was willing to expend my emotional labor, because I had told her, we are fasting. This is not a day for us to celebrate. This is a day of death for us. This is a day of rape for us. This is a day that your ancestors raped and pillaged and killed our ancestors. And you want us to sit down and honor and celebrate your ancestors for doing that? I was like, that's why we call it taking. You took everything possible from us, and in this moment, you're taking my emotional labor and you've interrupted our sacred painting ceremony. And she was very quiet. And she was like, well, I am sorry. How can I correct this? What can I do? And I had told her, well, I was like, I said, we're fasting and we're not going to eat until sundown, because we're also going onto the front lines and we don't know who's coming back. People end up getting arrested. People end up in the hospital. People end up injured, and we get separated. I said, and everyone here has a role. There's people who stay behind to cook. There's people who stay behind and pray. There's people who take extra daily tasks, because we all have daily tasks in this camp. I said, and there's people who are waiting for us to return, because we might be, covered in mace. We need help changing before we can come back into this circle with our other campers. There's so many components to this, but if you want to help, you can bring your food to us and you can serve us. I said, you, not your assistant, not your helpers, not your chefs. And she said, I can do that. When should I be back? And, I told her at sundown. And she said, okay, but before I go, can you help me with one really big thing? Because I'm learning a lot from you right now. And I've been here for 10 days and I still have a big question. And I said, okay, what is it? And she said, can you teach me and help me to learn how to be a good ally? And I said, okay, well, first of all, you have to acknowledge that all of your success and all of your privilege was built on the shoulders of my ancestors. And in order to be a good ally, you need to allow an indigenous leader to stand on the shoulders of your privilege and your success so that they can be seen and they can be heard. And so from there and forward, I watched her blossom ever since then, even, elevating and walking and holding hands with, Patrice Colors and Black Lives Matters, and just continuing doing even her Friday fire drills, and all the different things she's been doing. But in that moment, she had said she was so honored and she was going to come back that evening. And she did. But I was so exhausted. It was a long day. Sang my heart out that day. We were out there for like 6 hours. And when I got back, I just wanted to go sleep, and I did. And she came and she fed everyone, and she did exactly what we had asked of her. And I just told her I was too exhausted. I couldn't eat. I wanted to go straight to sleep. And she said, I'll come back in the morning. And when she came back in the morning, she had said she was very impressed by my leadership, and she wanted to know how she could support my leadership and how she could use her privilege. And so I told her, you know, I'm fundraising every week, and we're just trying to maintain so we can be a self-sufficient camp. And I had told her, I grew up in South Dakota. I know what the winters are like. And I've been paying $500 every week for this truck so we can have a 4-wheel drive truck for the Two-Spirit Nation. And I said, and when we're out on the front lines, the ambulance won't come to the camp. We have to transport and triage our own wounded here at the Healer Medics camp. And they moved their camp to be right next to the Two-Spirit Nation camp because we also cooked and fed all the doctors. A lot of them were vegetarian and vegan, and our camp always had a vegetarian option with every meal. And we made excess because we knew we were going to be cooking for the medics and for the, you know, the body workers and for all the folks who were giving their time. And so, you know, and I had told her, we're fundraising, we're, you know, holding down the grounds, being the foot soldiers on the ground. We're also holding ceremonies and healing Two-Spirit people and LGBTQ people so they can have a safe space and so they can also leave their trauma here. I said, we're doing different things all day long, and I really would love not to have to be fundraising for this truck. And she did. She ended up buying us a truck. And I had told her, we also need a hotel room because there was just the one hotel, the Standing Rock Tribal Casino. And I had said, I've been here since September, and this was Thanksgiving Day. And I said, for the past, 2.5 months, I have been on the wait list for a hotel room. I started out as number 44, and I'm number 27 on the wait list. And we have trans folks, we have, gender queer folks, we have non-binary folks who are not safe in the very binary high school showers. It's still that locker room trauma. And there's people who don't have safe spaces to shower or, to take care of themselves. And I need a hotel room for them. And so she said, you got it. I haven't checked out of my room. I will put your name on the room and I'll pay for the next 2 months. And she did. So, she definitely was a really strong ally to do those two things for us. But, even just that story and even just that lesson, I'm really grateful to see how that moved forward and how it continues to highlight the work she's doing today.
That's powerful.
Beautiful.
It's funny because I came to Two-Spirit Camp to interview you and you were with Jane Fonda. I was like, okay, well, I guess they're having a really important conversation. My conversation can wait. Wow. Okay. Well, that's okay. And I talked to somebody else out in camp, which was fine. But it was definitely, it's a powerful, Standing Rock in itself. There was a group of us talking about it just this past Sunday, and it's sort of a private group, but we were talking about how powerful it was, how it changed us. And I don't know if you had the same experience, but this is Bright Hawk, and she's saying that Standing Rock orientation was profound, and I agree. It changed my perspective, my life, and I'm still integrating messages from Standing Rock to this day. 6 years later, right? I mean, or 5 years, or however long it's been, we're still integrating what we learned just by being there. Like, I don't even know if it affected you quite in the same powerful way, but I know for me it did. And so anyway, I have to take a little commercial break. I have to play the little commercial.
Yes.
So let's take a moment to play the commercial, and we'll come right back. And if Candi can stay a little bit, we can talk about the way it changed things for us. Here we go.
WLFE-DB Radio has LGBTQ shows like Across the Pond, Rainbow Soul, Everything Yet Nothing, and Inside the Drag Closet. Check out the schedule on WLFE-DB.com. You can even watch them on TV at WLFE-DB.com under LGBTQ Friends, right off our website. Again, it's WLFE-DB.com for your LGBTQ shows and more.
WLFE-DB.com, where talk radio is a whole lot better. Our shows are your shows, and that there makes for a great talk radio.
All right, great. My computer's acting a little funny. Sorry about that. My computer's having one of those. It's actually Mercury in retrograde. So it's beginning its protest against being used so much, right? So I just want to come back to the one thing that conversation that we all had, that a few of us that had been to Standing Rock, what we experienced and how it changed us. Like, one of the big things that I walked away with was know your impact. Know the way you're impacting other people around you, and coming to the understanding and the awareness that Indigenous people didn't have access to medicine and things like that on the res. Ted was just talking about this in the chat. That the average person doesn't understand what's happening on any given day on the res. And I totally agree. Or the everyday life of an Indigenous person. It sounds like his mother became saddened every day. And I didn't know. I had no idea, even though I was a person that considered myself in support of the Indigenous people. I didn't know how bad it really was. And that orientation, and then also watching an Indigenous person struggle to stand up and say their prayer publicly at the orientation. I mean, I wanted to cry for him, and it changed the way I seen things. It made me more aware of my white privilege. Before it was cool to know your white privilege. And I just think Standing Rock was like, it was like a mind blow. Like, it blew my mind, and it changed me forever. And I don't know if it had that same impact on you, Candi. Maybe in a different way.
Well, definitely, it had an impact for me in a way where I seen how obedient I had become. Even just living in Portland and realizing that I allowed myself and my two children to, walk down the grocery store and have people, white people walk around us in a way where, like, we didn't exist. They would say, excuse me, to each other, but I realized in everything I did, after, I feel like there's pre-Standing Rock, Standing Rock, and post-Standing Rock. The versions of me, and even just the perspective I have, that's what I had said, my worldview, because I see even today, even moving back to Rapid City, to this is a town that I grew up in, I learned how, my mother is, so obedient. And when I do public speaking to my own tribal folks, my own Indigenous communities, I tell them we're obedient as fuck. Take a look around. This is our land, literally, where the Black Hills is still our land, and wherever it is, there's folks who don't realize how their families became wealthy, even their grandparents, or even if it was just land that was passed down to them. And I had coworkers that for me, EDI work, equity, diversity, inclusion work for me is always based on, the ownership of your privilege, and all the things we do, you need to take a privilege check, even just in your own scope of work, there's an indigenous person who could definitely stand on your shoulders to be seen and heard, just like this stream that's happening right now, definitely to ask yourself, how many indigenous friends do I really have? Who do I text with or talk to? How big is my circle beyond my white privilege or my white comfort? And how hard do my white tears create change for me and not for indigenous people? And to continue to acknowledge that I say I'm woke, but am I woke to what impacts the community I take space in? So for me, it went in an opposite direction where I had extreme PTSD. Like that first year, and I still have PTSD. It very much lives on the surface of my skin in everything that I do, but I've learned how to heal myself and how to utilize my traditional ways and spiritual practices and to be more authentic in the work that I do. And I feel like that has empowered me to continue to step in the front and do what I do, because there are so many people who are scared still, who didn't go to Standing Rock, and who are still in this space of fear. They fear, they have this oppressive mindset that, and I see it, and it really has an impact on the way I navigate in my work now, because I see folks who have the ability to create change, who are in positions of power, who have authority, but they don't know how to use it, and even, an example was this past week, I pushed our mayor in Rapid City to sign a proclamation to acknowledge that that May 5th is National Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Day. And, and I wrote this proclamation. And for me, the big component was the last paragraph where he stated, I wrote it and he, went back and forth. The only paragraph they didn't alter was the main paragraph I wanted. So I was grateful for that. And it, it said, I hereby, Mayor of Rapid City, strongly encourage businesses, organizations, and educational institutions to acknowledge, honor, and do the education to learn about missing and murdered Indigenous women and to empower the community. So for me, that's what I wanted this policy for. I do a lot of political work, and I have learned, that is how the opposite end, the opposition, they work and they navigate with policies and ordinances, and that's how they create, these ironclad oppressive movements for themselves to gain and retain their positions of power. So for me, I felt like, I am continuing to educate. I'm continuing to create more Indigenous leaders within the tribal settings, within rural areas, and within our Indigenous urban areas, so that folks know how to utilize their civil rights and how to, empower their civil liberties, and how to use that Constitution in the activism work that they're doing, how to, hold our militarized officers accountable for the brutality and for, violating our civil rights. So that's something that I have been doing, and I've been calling that work evolving the front lines. So, we've gone from being on the ground, being frontline water protectors, to standing in front of a legislative body and testifying and, pushing Indigenous bills that create change on a state level, district level, within municipals and rural cities and urban cities, but just to continue being seen and heard and walking in both worlds. So for me, it impacted me in a way where I even would show my children from Portland Public School, and I homeschooled them that whole first year we were home, because I knew that I was profoundly impacted by the trauma I went through. And, I was beat down in so many ways. I had a dislocated elbow at one time. I lost a tooth. I had hypothermia. I had 3rd-degree burns. I just got beat to the core while I was there. But it was through prayers and unshakable faith and, continued support from all the people who supported the Two-Spirit Nation, who supported water protectors, who supported the work that I did that, protected us and kept us going. But, from that, I definitely have seen that when we organize and when we come together, we definitely put that fear back into those oppressors, because that's one thing we have, is we can organize in vast numbers that they never seen before, especially water protectors, especially tribal nations. And so that's what I'm continuing to do, that work today and forward, is to, activate and elevate the voices of other indigenous leaders.
And I think one of the most powerful, beautiful things was that it was surrounded by prayer the whole time. There was prayer every day, pretty much all day. And that in itself, I felt was like, wow, adding prayer to activism and honoring the land and all of this is making it even more impactful for everyone in attendance. And I think even the guys on the other side, and I really appreciated that there were so many tribes together, that there were all of these different tribes. And for some reason, I've always have buddies and neighbors of the Taino tribe. So LaCrosse, I want to bring you into the conversation. I want to invite you to ask or say anything. But I really honor and respect all tribes, regardless of what tribe you're from. And I know that they've all been trying to be erased.
Honestly, the only question I would ask is like so many of us that our culture has just been ripped. It's been ripped. It's been taken away. And it's literally baby steps of just trying to regain some of that back. What do you recommend? If you tell these other tribes that have lost so much, what are outlets that we can use to start to regain some of that back?
Okay, so I always had a lot of people coming to our Two-Spirit Nation camp who had said, I don't feel comfortable identifying as Two-Spirit because I'm not tribally enrolled. Or they would say, I lost contact with my tribal nation. Or they would say, our tribe was terminated. There's just the different, very, traumatic deficits that kept folks from embracing their culture or their spiritual identities. And that is the intention of genocide. That is the intention of kill the Indian, save the man. That is their intent and has been to colonize. That's what it means to colonize, and so that's why I worked really hard to decolonize ceremonies while we were there. Because a lot of people were like, men sit here and women sit here, or this is the men's role and this is the women's role. There's nowhere for two spirits to be, and so a lot of times I really had to speak up. And that's why, even before I started my journey to Standing Rock to initiate the Two-Spirit Nation camp, I did a flesh offering, which is a very sacred ceremony. And I knew for me, the biggest oppressor would be toxic masculinity. I knew that, even my own tribal nations and relatives would continue to carry that homophobia and that transphobia and that continued learned behavior from the oppressor. So I had folks come through and I would tell them, I would tell them literally, put your hand on your heart and feel that heartbeat. You're carrying your ancestors' blood. It's pumping through your veins right now. That came from your grandparents. That came from their grandparents. You're literally carrying ancestral DNA. No one can take that away from you. even if they took your land base, even if they took your federal identity, and that's the intent for blood quantum. The smaller our blood quantum, in our children and grandchildren becomes, the less our tribal numbers are going to be. That is the intent with tribal enrollment. And so no one can take that from you. And so I would encourage people, because I had said, I want each and every one of us to go home and fill our communities with visibility of who we are and what we represent, whether it's Two-Spirit or just being indigenous or just being an ally, or even, wanting to break down those barriers and smash patriarchy and call out colonizer behavior. So, I would tell them, go up on Facebook Hill. If you have to go on YouTube and learn a song in your tribal nation or, whatever that is, I want you to learn a song so you can carry that song with you. I want you to learn a word or a few words in your language, even just to be able to pray and learn how to talk to Creator and, to make that connection, because your cultural and spiritual identity is between you and the Creator. No one else can alter that. Just like your heartbeat is pumping, your ancestors are pumping through your body. They're walking with you. And that's all up to you, how you want to honor that. Do you want to honor these colonizers who oppressed and created genocidal attack on you and your family? Or are you going to hold on to what walks with you every day and who you are made of and what you are? So, I had so many Two-Spirit people say, I still sing those songs. I've learned 10 more songs since then, and I don't know who or what, said you can't learn these songs from YouTube or on the internet or, because someone was intentional about passing it down or passing it forward. And so, whatever that is, I want to encourage folks to fight back, because that is how you get to fight back. You have the ability to maintain and retain your ancestors' prayers and love and intent for you.
Right. Thank you. That's very powerful. That's very powerful, because it does. It gets discouraging sometimes, because sometimes you don't even know where to begin, because there's been so much that's been lost. And it's just like I said, you're talking 500 years of, we got hit pretty hard, and it's just really hard to see. And so many don't even know. And I think that's the hardest part, is knowing that so many people that are from the Caribbean have no idea that they have indigenous blood. They are completely void of any knowledge, and that's scary. So, yeah, but I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, definitely.
And I personally think I like to give as much space for that as possible. And I love to give away my white privilege. It's one of my favorite things to do. It helps me feel less white, because there is a little bit of, which was talked about at Standing Rock a little bit, which is shame, white shame, where we actually feel ashamed of our ancestors. Like, I can't believe they enslaved people of color. I can't believe they took I don't want to believe it, but I know it happened. I know it's true. And it's enough that we as white people also can internalize shame. And so I think one of my ways of trying to, say, gosh, whether my ancestors were sorry or not, I'm sorry for my ancestors, because clearly I'm white. My skin's white. I don't know anything about my DNA. I haven't gotten it tested or anything. But I know that for me, that's my way. And so if you're a white person out there and you're watching the show and you're like, I want to do something, if nothing else, just get on and read the news, educate yourself, and know what's going on, and tell other white people. Tell them. So especially the ones that you think are going to want to help, that the ones that are open, and here I am part of the WLFE DB network, which probably has a lot of white people on it. But here's our producer, Ted, and he's saying WLFE DB wants to help. Let's figure out how we can help. And that's beautiful, right? That's how we start a domino effect of trying to change this. Because I'm not happy with it. It doesn't sit well in my gut. It doesn't make my soul feel good about my ancestors. I don't even want to know. Okay? And I think it's our way of trying to step forward and try to, I know we can't make it better. I know we don't fully understand. But we can try to do something, even if it is, like Candi said, to just take it home and to tell your aunt or whatever. And I love to encourage Lacrosse here to bring his Taino stuff to the stage. And I think next week, that's what we're doing. We're bringing, I think, the chief, right?
Yeah, or cacique. We're bringing the cacique and the bejique of the tribe here that we have established here. So yeah, that's going to be exciting. He's going to have a lot to share.
And that, in my opinion, is beautiful. And that's what you can do, my white friends out there that are seeing this and moved, and your heart is busting open. I know that feeling. I know that feeling where you're like, oh, what am I going to do with this? That's what you can do. And I also know that almost always when Candi is protesting, somebody has to get bailed out of jail.
Definitely.
And I'm like, okay, where are we sending money this week? Where are we sending money for that? And so, because I think making that available, Candi, is important. Because, you know, if we all throw in $10, so-and-so is going to get bailed out and they don't have to dip into their money. And, you know, some people might have more than that. Some people can give. And so making that easy is also a great way, I would say. And I'm always willing to help any indigenous tribe make it easy to collect money online for free. I won't charge you for my services at all. So I just want to say that. So anytime anyone is doing that, any kind of movement, and you need money, I can help you set it up. So,
well, I definitely do have an ask because, you know,
go for it.
Pride Month is coming up, and the Two Spirit Nation is going to be having our first youth camp. And, you know, I'm working with a couple Two Spirit youth artists. So we're going to have, you know, because that's part of the component of being a Two Spirit is, like I said, embracing our culture and our spirituality. So we're going to have art lessons each day, and it's going to be virtual. And then we also have Two Spirit water protectors who are going to tell their story. So each day we have a different person. And so we can try to start working and mentoring, but we're needing supplies. You know, I've gotten a couple mini grants to pay for these honorariums for the speakers and to set up, you know, the workshops that we need to have. But you know, now we have to fundraise to get the sewing machines and the beads and the porcupine quills and all the different things that we need for each of the 5 projects each day. And so this is our pilot project because we're going to do it online. And then next year, it's going to be more of like a coming of age ceremony. And we're getting the week in itself, you know, specifically for Two Spirit people. We're going to be having it here in South Dakota. It's going to be near one of our sacred ceremony sites. But so this year, we just, you know, want to have our very first youth Two Spirit Nation camp. And it's a week long. It's going to be like the 3rd week in June. But I would like for folks to donate to our website. We have a donate button, and our website is www.thetwospiritnation.org.
Okay. I think that's the one we have going up. Yep. thetwospiritnation.org. Great. Yes. So that's the one we've been showing all night. So hopefully people can make any kind of contributions there. Please make a donation. $5 goes. If everybody donates $5, that's $50 if 10 people, you know, give. Mm-hmm. So give what you got. And I think it's beautiful, the work that you're doing, Candi. I think it's precious and worth celebrating and worth talking about. And absolutely. I wish And if you have anything that the WLFE DB, if you have like a little video, or if I can make you a video about making those donations, I'm sure Ted would be happy to play it on our channels to get a little bit more people to see it for you.
Okay,
And I know, yeah, we could get a little commercial video going, and that could be that could be great fun. So we all play commercials on all of our shows, and the network's pretty full. Lacrosse here has an amazing show. Lacrosse does a show about LGBTQ people sharing their story. So that's also beautiful. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I love stories. I think that's just a storytelling is my thing.
Well, I think it's fantastic what you're doing. So, and I like to celebrate it. So we just have a few minutes left. And if anyone in the audience has any questions, please bring it up. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull from my Love is Love tarot card deck. And it is an LGBT collaborative deck that has every single picture, every single card was made by a different LGBTQ artist. And the beautiful thing is there are people of color and indigenous people also represented in this deck, which I'm like, whoa, we finally did it. We included everybody. So here we are. I'm going to pull 3 cards for the whole group, for everybody that's here watching now and everybody that will be watching. Interestingly, the Knight of Wands is all about thoughts, people. So the BLM movement, the indigenous movement, Standing Rock, everything that's been happening to us as a culture, as a people of this, of this land, all of us here, whether you chose to be here or not, those thoughts that have been coming through, it's important. Take them forward. The beliefs, the things we've been challenging about, like white supremacy and all the different movements that have been going on. Take those thoughts forward, because right now is the time to change. And that's what this is. This is like a protest card, and it's the 5 of Wands. And if you look closely, it says silence equals death there. And I think this definitely portrays the protest experience that's happening right now. And you can be part of the protest too. You know, even if you can't be on the front lines like Candi is, you can be part of the protest just simply by saying, hey, I'm not sure Thanksgiving is what we thought it was. And, trying to see it a little different. Or, I call it forgiving, because I try to forgive my ancestors for their stupidness. So that's what I do. But everybody has their own way. And so I just want to encourage you to find your own way to protest, whatever that looks like for you. And know in the future that there is healing coming to the heart. There is healing coming to the heart. And to celebrate what the healing is and what healing is happening to all of us now and in the future. Be ready, my friends, because it's happening. And that's what this card is all about. It's happening right now. We are in the time of Aquarius. This is supposed to be happening. And as we rebuild in the coming year to next couple of years, we are going to find that we are going to want to include important things like restoring indigenous culture, giving the space and whatever we have to do to help us all live in harmony, because that is possible, but we just have to bring it forward. That's what our job is. That's why we're here. That's why we're all alive. And that's why you're alive right now during this time. And that's why you're witnessing this show. And that's why you're here. So I hope you awaken to whatever your activism is in your home, whatever you need to do to make you feel more connected to your divine self, whatever that might look like for you. And I want to honor all indigenous tribes everywhere. And like Lacrosse always says, we're all indigenous to someplace. So I appreciate that because my ancestors were probably from Europe or something. And so I, recognize that too. And I appreciate that, Lacrosse, because that's your wisdom sinking into me, where I can say, well, even the Irish pagans were dismissed by the Christianity. They were told the ancient cultures, the Celts and things were dismissed out of their land in Ireland and Europe and told that they couldn't practice their religion as well. So it's interesting when you said that, Lacrosse, because it really made me think of that. So I want to thank you for that wisdom. So, and thank you, Candi, for being on the show today, for taking time out of Mother's Day to do this work and all of the work you do for the beautiful indigenous women that are being murdered and raped. Like, my heart just goes out. Like, I wish there was something I could do personally. And thank you for all the work you do, including Mount Rushmore and Standing Rock. All of those are important.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed myself.
Well, that's fantastic. That's the whole idea. We like to have a good time here. So, and I appreciate you, Lacrosse. Thanks for being here and helping me hold space for this very special opportunity.
No, it was nice. I learned a lot. I really learned a lot, and realizing, we still are very colonized in our mentality, and it's something like what she mentioned earlier about calling ourselves Native American, and I'm like, wow, yeah, that hit home. That hit home because that's, it's it is a colonized mentality, and it's so hard to get out of. It's not impossible, but it's hard. And every day it's this constant journey and fight to regain something back. So I just want to thank you, even with something like that just was awakening. And I just really appreciate you for telling me, I needed to hear that. And I just genuinely appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your support as well. Definitely representing your ancestral background and your ancestors themselves. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. I hope you tune in next Sunday for our discussion with Taino Chief. And I look forward to that. I look forward to that next Sunday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for watching. Please share and follow and comment. It helps us all, and make some donations to Candi. I want to see those Two-Spirit youth celebrated this year. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Have a good night, everyone. Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you for watching Rainbow Soul, part of the WLFE DB Network. A queer perspective on spirituality beyond religion. We appreciate you sharing the show on your timeline. Follow us on social media of your choice and join our Facebook group, Rainbow Soul. We want to hear from you. Share your topic ideas for Hollis and Lacrosse. Explore upcoming shows and interesting guests. The Rainbow Soul Facebook group, where we build community of questioning seekers. Rainbow Soul, where spirituality is our medicine.